Ten-pin bowling is a common sport that is often played competitively and for leisure by people of all ages. For the purposes of this video, I will analyze the movements of a female high school competitive bowler as she performs them. I will concentrate on the movements occurring in her right arm, which is her throwing arm. I will analyze motions taking place at the glenohumeral joint, the humeral ulnar joint, the proximal and distal radial ulnar joints, and the radiocarpal and midcarpal joints. There are 3 phases to bowling: the preparation stance, the movement, and finally the follow-through. The preparation stance occurs after the bowler has stepped onto the platform with ball in hand. During this phase, the bowler aligns body, feet, and eyes with the pins. For this bowler, the preparation phase consists of the glenohumeral joint is flexed to about 5 degrees. This is an isometric contraction of the shoulder flexors to hold the ball in position. The glenohumeral joint is also in slight internal rotation, about 5 degrees. This is also an isometric contraction of the shoulder internal rotators to hold the ball in position. The humeral ulnar joint is flexed to about 30 degrees. This is an isometric contraction of the elbow flexors to hold the weight of the ball. The proximal and distal radioulnar joint are supinated to about 15 degrees. This is also an isometric contraction of the forearm supinators to hold the ball in position and to prevent pronation caused by the weight of the ball. The radiocarpal and midcarpal joints are in neutral flexion extension. This is an isometric contraction of wrist flexors to hold the weight of the ball. The radiocarpal and midcarpal joints are also in about 10 degrees of ulnar deviation. This again is an isometric contraction of the ulnar deviators to hold the ball in position. As the bowler takes her first step, the movement phase or throwing of the ball begins. The first stage of this phase is initiation. It is noted by the glenohumeral joint becomes flexed to 20 degrees. This is a concentric contraction of the shoulder flexors to lift the ball. The glenohumeral joint also abducts to about 10 degrees. This is caused by a concentric contraction of the trunk lateral flexors, creating a proximal on distal movement as the trunk laterally flexes and the arm is stabilized by the weight of the ball. The humerus also externally rotates to neutral. This is a concentric contraction of the shoulder external rotators to clear the ball from the advancing leg. The humeral ulnar joint flexes to 90 degrees. This is a concentric contraction of the elbow flexors to lift the ball for clearing of the advancing leg. The proximal and distal radioulnar joint increases in supination to 70 degrees. This again is a concentric contraction of the forearm supinators to accept more weight of the ball onto the throwing hand. The radiocarpal and midcarpal joint extends to 20 degrees. This is an eccentric contraction of the wrist flexors, which are trying to stabilize the wrist as it carries more weight of the ball. There is also radial deviation to neutral. This is a concentric contraction of radial deviators to position the ball for an even release. The next stage of movement is push-off, which occurs during the second step and ends as the ball reaches its peak height anterior to the body. During this stage, the glenohumeral joint flexes to 45 degrees. This is a concentric contraction of shoulder flexors to lift the ball to create momentum. The glenohumeral joint also remains in abduction to about 10 degrees. This is held by an isometric contraction of trunk lateral flexors as the humerus remains perpendicular to the horizon. The humerus also remains in neutral rotation. This is held by isometric contraction of the shoulder internal and external rotators to control the weight of the ball from falling to one side or the other. The humeral ulnar joint decreases flexion to about 80 degrees. This is an eccentric contraction of the elbow flexors to control the elbow extension caused by the weight of the ball. The proximal and distal ulnar joint increases supination to 80 degrees. This is a concentric contraction of the forearm supinators to accept nearly all the weight of the ball onto the throwing hand. The radiocarpal and midcarpal joint increases extension to 45 degrees. This is an eccentric contraction of wrist flexors to control extension caused by weight of the ball. Once the ball reaches its height anterior to the body, it begins descent and picks up momentum. Descent of the ball occurs between the peak of the ball's height anterior to the body and the ball's lowest point. During the descent of the ball, the glenohumeral joint decreases flexion to 15 degrees. This is an eccentric contraction of the shoulder flexors to control the descent of the ball. This joint also remains in abduction at about 10 degrees. This is an isometric contraction of the trunk lateral flexors as the humerus remains perpendicular to the horizon. This is also meant to clear the ball from the body during the swing. The humerus also remains in neutral rotation. This is caused by an isometric contraction of the shoulder internal and external rotators to control the weight of the ball from falling to one side or the other. The humeral ulnar joint is now in full extension. This is caused by an eccentric contraction of the elbow flexors to control the elbow extension caused by the weight of the ball as it descends. The proximal and distal radial ulnar joint increases supination to 90 degrees, or full supination. Concentric contraction of forearm supinators to accept all the weight of the ball into the throwing hand allows for this motion to take place. Radiocarpal and midcarpal joints extend to 20 degrees. This is an eccentric contraction of the wrist flexors to prevent the momentum of the ball from causing overextension of the wrist. This joint also ulnarly deviates about 5 degrees. This is a concentric contraction of the ulnar deviators to position the ball for release and to cock the wrist in preparation to radially deviate at release. Next, the bowler drawbacks the ball. The drawback stage begins when the ball is at its lowest point and ends when the ball is at its peak height posterior to the body. During drawback, the glenohumeral joint extends to 45 degrees This is a concentric contraction of the shoulder extensors to lift the ball. The humerus, again, remains in 10 degrees of abduction, caused by isometric contraction of the trunk lateral flexors. The humerus remains in neutral rotation. The humeral ulnar joint is now in full extension, which is caused by an isometric contraction of the elbow extensors to keep the elbow in extension as the ball reaches longitudinal peak posterior to the body. The proximal and distal radial-ulnar joint decreases supination to 70 degrees. This is an eccentric contraction of forearm supinators to control the rotation of the forearm caused by the momentum of the ball. The radiocarpal and midcarpal joint extends to 45 degrees. This is a concentric contraction of wrist extensors to pull the ball higher so more momentum is developed for release. This joint also remains in 5 degrees of ulnar deviation, caused by an isometric contraction of ulnar deviators to position the ball for release to cock the wrist in preparation to radially deviate at release. The final stage of the movement phase is release. Release occurs as the ball begins to make its final descent and ends the instant the ball leaves the throwing hand of the bowler. During release, the glenohumeral joint flexes to 80 degrees. This is a concentric contraction of shoulder flexors in order to push the ball anterior to the body. At this point, the humerus also undergoes about 20 degrees of horizontal abduction. This is caused by concentric contraction of the trunk rotators away from the long axis of the arm, which is being stabilized by the weight of the ball. The humeral ulnar joint flexes to 10 degrees. This is a concentric contraction of elbow flexors to push the ball anterior to the body. The proximal and distal radial ulnar joint remains in 70 degrees of supination throughout the anterior swing. But as the ball is released, this joint undergoes pronation, which creates a bit of a spin on the ball. The beginning of this motion is caused by an isometric contraction of the forearm supinators throughout the anterior swing to control the rotation of the forearm caused by the momentum of the ball. It becomes a concentric contraction of the pronators to move the arm into neutral as the ball is released. The radiocarpal and midcarpal joints remain in 45 degrees of extension. This is an isometric contraction of the wrist extensors to clear the thumb and fingers as the ball leaves the hand. The radiocarpal and midcarpal joints also experience radial deviation to neutral. This is a concentric contraction of the radial deviators to assist in pushing the ball anterior to the body and to clear the thumb from the hole as the ball is released. Once the ball leaves the bowler's hand, she performs a follow-through motion. During follow-through, the glenohumeral joint undergoes flexion to 100 degrees. This is an eccentric contraction of the shoulder extensors to slow the rate of flexion. The humeral ulnar joint undergoes full extension. This is a concentric contraction of the elbow extensors, sometimes used to create another dimension of spin on the ball. The radial ulnar joint moves into neutral or slight pronation. This is an eccentric contraction of the supinators to slow pronation after the ball is released. The radiocarpal and midcarpal joints extend to about 50 degrees. This is an eccentric contraction of the wrist flexors to slow the rate of extension after the sudden change in external forces. The radiocarpal and midcarpal joints also undergo radial deviation to 10 degrees. At this point, an eccentric contraction of ulnar deviators occur to slow the rate of radial deviation after the sudden change in external forces.